It was a night like any other when I first saw it. I was just 9 years old, holding my father's telescope, the one he'd given me weeks before. It was my ticket to the stars, my escape from the suffocating city lights that made it hard to see anything in the sky. I had spent weeks looking through the eyepiece, finding constellations that were faint, but still visible with the right focus. That night, though, something felt wrong. I don't know what it was. Maybe a shift in the air, a strange feeling crawling up my spine. But as I peered through the lens, something caught my eye. At first, it was just a shadow, moving unnaturally fast, crawling on all fours towards Libby's house across the street. It wasn't just a shadow, though. This thing was huge, impossibly large like a man, but distorted. Its limbs stretched in ways that made no sense. I froze, my heart thundering in my chest. I couldn't look away as it reached her window. I saw it then, that grotesque moment. Its massive arm moved through the glass, like it was butter, and yanked her out of her bedroom with terrifying ease. Libby was screaming, kicking, but her screams, they didn't even seem real, like they were fading, swallowed by the night. I shrieked, called out for my dad, and he rushed in, trying to calm me down. I barely managed to tell him what I saw, but when I did, he called the police. They came, took my statement, but I could tell they didn't believe me. They thought I was just a scared kid with a wild imagination, but I knew what I saw. Libby was gone. Her parents were on every news station, pleading for her return. Weeks went by, and the whole town was on edge. Then, another girl, Alice Evans, taken the same way. And then, 7 girls, each of them snatched from their bedrooms in the dead of night. It wasn't just me, other kids had seen the man, the thing, though none could explain it. Still, no one listened. It was too bizarre, too monstrous. The authorities brushed it off until the bodies were found. 7 little girls, so mangled and torn that their families had to bury them in closed caskets. I remember the day they confirmed Alice was dead. My little brother, Alan, went silent after that. Alice had been his girlfriend. He never spoke again. The police finally arrested someone, Billy Stout, a local guy with a history, born with a condition that left him towering over everyone at 7 feet tall, but with the mind of a child. I'd known Billy. We traded baseball cards once, laughed like kids do. But when they found his shirt with Libby's blood on it, everything changed. They locked him up and sentenced him to death, but it didn't make sense. I had seen something else. I had seen a monster, a giant, not Billy, but no one believed me. They all said I was wrong. They said it was Billy, and they closed the case. By the time we moved away, things had only gotten worse. Alan wasn't the same. He stopped talking, stopped interacting. He would stare out the window for hours. Dad had to get a full-time caretaker. As for me, I couldn't shake it. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone, was still out there, something much worse than Billy. I spent years trying to find answers. I read everything I could, books on ghosts, monsters, serial killers. Anything that might explain what I had seen. I was the weird kid, the one everyone called spooky, the one they whispered about behind my back. But there was someone who understood. Stephanie Powell. Her twin sister had been taken that same night, and she had drawn sketches of the dark figure that had dragged her sister away. Stephanie and I grew close, and then she introduced me to Deani Jackson. His little sister had been taken too. We were 3 broken souls, bound by a shared grief and the certainty that whatever had taken our loved ones was still out there. And we weren't about to stop looking. I wish I could say we found peace, but that's where the story really begins. It was one of those quiet, eerie evenings when the shadows grow long and the world feels too still. Deani and I had been walking our usual route, watching Stephanie home before heading back to my new place. That night, as we passed by an old corner house, Deani suddenly stopped. He pointed at a patch of trees near the street, his voice low but urgent. "Hey, Spooky, Look. I squinted, trying to see what he was pointing at. The sun was dipping below the horizon, casting everything in an orange haze, and the trees were barely more than silhouettes. At first, I didn't see anything, but then, out of the corner of my eye, I caught a shadow, tall and unnaturally large, standing just inside the trees. Diani didn't wait. He darted past me before I could even react. I hesitated for a moment, but something pulled at me. I followed. The figure dropped to all fours, moving faster than anything should have, sprinting across the street and disappearing into an alley. Diani, frantic now, chased after it. I was right behind him, running through the dark, narrow alley that I hadn't even known existed until then. The walls closed in on us, garages and chain-link fences on either side. The alley seemed to stretch on forever, and with every turn, I thought I was losing it. At the end of the alley was a massive stone wall. It towered over us, blocking any further escape. The narrow path barely allowed enough room for a car to pass, and that's when we saw it, a hulking figure, standing between us and the last rays of the dying sun. The orange light illuminated its silhouette, making it look even more monstrous. It was impossibly tall, at least 10 feet, with skin as dark as night. Its eyes were a piercing, unnatural blue, and when it opened its mouth, I could see teeth sharp, pointed, like they'd been carefully honed into tiny daggers. I realized, too late, what was happening. This wasn't just some freak running from us. No, it was baiting us. Every step it took toward us was deliberate, calculated. Our backs were against the stone wall, and that's when it lowered its face, bringing its eyes level with mine. I could feel its breath, cold and rancid, as its tongue flicked out, licking my cheek. Tears welled up in my eyes as the creature's expression shifted to something darker, something frustrated. It turned its attention to Diani, sniffing the air with a strange, almost disgusted look. Without warning, it planted one foot on the wall beside us, pushing its massive form up, scaling the stone like it was nothing. We didn't stick around to see if it would come back. We ran. We didn't look back, not even once. We didn't stop until we were safe inside my house. My dad was working late, but the caretaker gave us sodas from the fridge as we tried to make sense of what we had just seen. The whole night felt like a dream, too impossible to be real, but everything in me knew it was. The next morning, we returned to that alley, this time in daylight. The sun was high, but there was still that lingering sense of unease, like the shadows never really left. I had brought something with me, my father's gun, tucked safely in my pocket, just in case. We retraced our steps, but this time, we searched every inch of that alley, looking for anything that could explain what we'd seen. It was then we found it, a raised mound of dirt, concealing a hole in the ground. The hole was wide enough to fit a person, but none of us were eager to climb down. I threw a rock into it, and we listened. It bounced, then splashed into something that sounded like water. Diani, in his usual cocky way, said, "I'm gonna piss in it." Stephanie turned away as Diani did just that, and the sound of his urine hitting the water below made my stomach twist. But no sooner had he finished than we heard a deep, guttural roar from somewhere far below. It was the sound of something waking up. We turned to run, but as we looked back, I saw its hand, massive and black as night, swiping out from the darkness, trying to grab us. We had found its lair. We should have told someone. We should have gotten help. But after all those years of trying to convince anyone that the thing we had seen was real, I knew no one would believe us. No one would listen. So, instead of acting on it, we went back to what we knew best, the library. The three of us spent hours, flipping through books on ghosts, monsters, cryptids, anything that might explain what we had just witnessed. I was deep in the paranormal section, lost in a world of local legends and dark myths, when I realized Diani and Stephanie had gone missing. I assumed they had slipped away to do something else, maybe just to get some space from the madness of it all. But what I didn't know, what none of us knew, was that the darkness was only just beginning to creep closer. The day had been quiet, with a subtle sense of unease hanging over us. Diani and Stephanie had been dating for a few months by then, and that evening, we found ourselves stuck in a situation we hadn't quite anticipated. The library had closed early, and when I stepped outside, I saw them sitting together on a bench. Stephanie had her Walkman on, sharing the headphones with Diani, their heads close as they listened to music, wrapped up in their own world. The sun was still high in the sky, but we were miles away from home, and the bus had stopped running for the night. I felt that uneasy sensation in my gut, the kind that comes when you know something isn't right. She shook her head quickly. My dad hates Diani. I'd have better luck calling the police and telling them I stole something. Diani, always laughing it off, chimed in. Yeah, the dude's got it out for me. But we can call my cousin, Kiowa. He pointed to a nearby payphone. I dropped a quarter into the slot and called Kiowa. A few minutes later, a beat-up station wagon pulled up, and Kiowa waved as he got out. He was a few years older than us, a cool, laid-back guy. Yo, Diani, who's your friend? Kiowa asked, nodding at me. Diani punched me in the arm? Laughing. Oh, you mean Spooky here? Nah, he's just a guy I know. Stop clowning. Man, Kiowa chuckled, get in. We piled into the car, Diani and Stephanie in the back seat, Kiowa driving. Kiowa lived with his aunt and grandma, not too far from my place, so it was a familiar ride. I reached into my bag for my water bottle, but as I did, Kiowa caught sight of the pistol sticking out. Yo, why you packing heat? He asked, a bit concerned. I froze for a moment, then said, you don't want to know. Kiowa didn't press the issue. We drove in silence for a while, and eventually, Kiowa pulled into his driveway. He turned to me with a raised eyebrow and said, so, you're running around with a gun? Huh, what's that about? I stared out the window, avoiding his gaze. You know why they call me Spooky? I asked. Yeah, because you're always going on about ghosts and stuff, he said, sounding a bit confused. I laughed nervously, then sighed. It's because I saw the thing that took Dee's sister. It grabbed Libby Powell. Kiowa's expression shifted immediately from casual to serious. He raised his voice just slightly. Don't start with that ghost stuff. Man, I don't want to hear it, but I couldn't help myself. I turned to Kiowa and stared him down. It wasn't a ghost. It looked like a man, but its skin was black as midnight. It was almost 10 feet tall. You think I'm messing around? Kiowa's face went pale, and he physically shuddered. Damn, I can see why they call you Spooky, he said quietly. I leaned back in my seat, the weight of what we had seen settling heavy in the air. We know where it's hiding, and the next time I see it, I'm shooting it. Don't tell Dee or Stephanie. Though, they don't know about my dad's gun. Kiowa pulled a cigarette from his pocket, offering it to me. You smoke? I lied. Yeah, sure. He lit the cigarette and handed it to me. I took a drag, feeling the cool menthol hit my lungs. I coughed slightly, but after a few more hits, I started to enjoy it, the smoke clouding my thoughts. We sat in silence for a few minutes, both of us lost in our own thoughts. Finally, Kiowa spoke again. You should talk to my grandma about that tall, dark dude. Sounds like a story she used to tell us when we were kids. We went inside, and Diani's grandma had laid out a huge meal for us. Stephanie and Grams were chatting while Kiowa and I caught up. The house smelled like spices and comfort, but I still couldn't shake the feeling of the dark man lurking somewhere nearby. Grams caught a whiff of the smoke on me as I walked in. Marcus Jackson, you better wash your hands before you touch this food, she said, giving me a sharp look. I washed my hands, not wanting to get on her bad side. We all sat down at the table, and we ate, trying to pretend that everything was normal, even though none of us could forget what we'd seen. Stephanie had called her parents, saying she was at my house, and my dad wouldn't be home until late. After dinner, Grams told Kiowa to take Stephanie home. Diani went upstairs to shower and get ready for bed. I stayed behind to help clear the table. As I was finishing, Grams turned to me, her face serious. "So, what were you and Kiowa talking about outside? You looked like you'd seen a ghost." I didn't answer immediately. I took the last dish from the table and set it on the counter. Then, finally, I said, "You shouldn't be running around this town at night. It's dangerous out there." Grams gave me a sharp look. I laughed inwardly, knowing she had no idea just how dangerous it really was. Grams sat there, her eyes narrowing as I spoke, halfway between skepticism and something darker. After I finished telling her everything about Libby and the dark man, she didn't dismiss me outright. She didn't tell me I was crazy or that I was making things up. It was a relief, to be honest, to have an adult actually listen to me for once. For the next hour, I poured out everything. The man at the end of the alley, how it had felt like something wasn't right, and how it had somehow found a hole to hide in, as if it were waiting. Diani came downstairs in his pajamas and posted up next to his grandmother. Grams turned to him, giving him a sharp look. "So, y'all ran into him, huh?" Diani nodded, and she reached into her purse and pulled out a small metal flask. After taking a long swig, she sighed, sitting back. "Listen close. This might save your life." I leaned in, sensing that she wasn't just going to tell another ghost story. Grams began speaking about a time when she was about Q's age, when people feared the Russians might drop atom bombs. In response, the city council had decided to dig a series of tunnels to connect fallout shelters under the city. The old elementary school, now long forgotten, had one of those shelters in the basement, and Percy, her husband, worked on the crew digging the tunnels. He came home each night, telling her strange stories about the tunnels they had dug, how they stretched from the school all the way to the train depot on 3rd Avenue. But eventually, people stopped worrying about the bombs, and the city abandoned the project. Percy got a job working for the city, and the shelters were left to rot, forgotten until something far worse was uncovered. One day, Grams continued, people started noticing the kids were missing. We'd been telling the police for weeks, but back then, they didn't care much for a bunch of colored kids. It wasn't until the mayor's daughter went missing that they started paying attention. 3 of the kids were gone over a weekend, and one of the mothers described a tall black man running off toward the school. The police searched the whole school and found nothing. But when they searched the basement, they found the tunnels standing wide open. It didn't take long before the police found the bodies. 15 kids, torn to pieces, left behind in the fallout shelter. Some of them had been there for months. One of the last girls to be taken, still barely alive, had pointed toward the tunnels and let out a whimper before she passed away. Grams paused, taking another swig from her flask, her face darkening as she continued. The police didn't waste any time. They rounded up every black man they could find and blamed it on Alton Park, the janitor at the school. He was slow, but he didn't deserve what they did to him. They sentenced him to hang in less than a day. Beatrice Stone, the mother of one of the missing girls, sat outside the courthouse screaming that Alton was innocent. She said he wasn't tall enough and that the man who took her daughter was as black as pitch, not brown like some of the men they were accusing. Grams paused for a moment, looking out the window as if seeing something only she could understand. Beatrice spent the next few years in a sanitarium. Her family finally brought her back home, but she doesn't speak anymore. I think she's still in that nursing home in Spring Haven. People say she just sits by the window, staring. I sat there, stunned by her story, my mind racing. But one thing didn't sit right with me. But how is this supposed to save our lives? Grams let out a long sigh, clearly expecting this question. I was getting to that, she said. She paused, then grabbed my backpack, holding it tighter for a moment. About 10 years later, kids started going missing again, she said, voice dropping. This time, we knew what to do. We weren't going to let it happen again. We kept watch. Every night, Someone took a shift watching the kids. Q's mother was about 5 or 6 then. Percy and James took turns sitting by the window with a shotgun, watching. Mabel, Q's mom, and her brother Ozzy were in bed. When it came for them, Grams paused and took another drink. Percy said it looked like a shadow at first, just a dark shape moving across the room. Jesse was holding the shotgun, fired a shot directly into it. The thing let out a howl, and Jesse and Mabel screamed, falling to the floor. The creature grabbed James, threw him against the wall, knocked him out cold. Percy grabbed the gun, but it was already too late. Her voice grew quieter. The creature leaned over Mabel, sniffing her, then it looked at Jesse. It reached for her just as Percy reloaded the shotgun and blasted it in the face. It screamed, jumped out of the window, and disappeared into the night. Grams took another swig from the flask and passed it to Diani. "Drink up," she said, looking at both of us. Diani took the flask, took a swig, and gagged before passing it to me. I looked down at the flask in my hand, my mind still spinning. Graham's story was chilling, but there was something real about it, something I couldn't deny. It felt like we were being prepared for something we didn't fully understand yet, something we might face soon. I took a sip from the flask, and the burn slid down my throat. Grams took it back from me, and I could tell that she wasn't done with her story. Jesse had been the sweetest boy, always so kind. Mabel, on the other hand, had always been a little troublemaker. After talking to Ethel Pearson at the church, I heard about the twin girls who had been sleeping in the same bed, only for one of them to be taken, and the other left behind. The surviving girl had been caught stealing from her mother's purse just that day, and Grams cursed under her breath as she shook her head. Diani spoke up, interrupting her with a question. "Huh, so it only takes the good kids, right?" Grams grinned and patted his head. "That's my smart boy. Now don't go setting the church on fire, or anything good, but make sure you do at least one thing every day that could get you in trouble if you got caught." The next day, I skipped church and walked up to Spring Haven. After showing the nurse my Bible and claiming I was there to minister to the elderly, she let me in with a smile. Grams had told me about a woman named Beatrice Stone, and I was determined to see her. I walked the hallways, stopping in a few rooms to talk to the elderly about Jesus, not wanting to raise any suspicion. Finally, I came to a room with a nameplate reading Beatrice Stone outside. Inside, an elderly woman sat in a chair, staring out the window. I sat down beside her and opened my Bible. "Mrs. Stone, my name is Frances Colley." She didn't respond, not even a blink. I continued, "I know this might sound strange, but I have a question for you, about the thing that took your daughter." Her face shifted, and her eyes shot toward me, but her body remained in the general direction of the window. I hesitated but then asked, "Did it have blue eyes?" Her expression hardened, and in a quiet voice, she whispered, "His teeth were like knives." I realized I had been inconsiderate. "How did you get close enough to see him?" she asked. I told her about the alley, how the creature had gotten close to me, and how it had almost licked me. Before I could say anything else, she grabbed me by the wrist. "How did you get out alive? When my baby died, what makes you so special?" I didn't have an answer for her, but I remembered what Grams had said the night before. It only takes the good kids. Suddenly, Beatrice leapt from her chair with shocking speed and pummeled me with a strength I hadn't expected from someone her age. She scratched at my face, and I screamed in pain. The orderlies quickly pulled her away, but she shouted, "If it won't kill you, I will." I had to call my dad and lie about what had happened, telling him I had been evangelizing to the sick and elderly, but that one of the women attacked me. I showed up to school the next day with stitches on my forehead. Diani asked what had happened, and I lied, telling him I had gotten into a fight with a high schooler. He laughed and joked about me getting into a fight with Cindy Crawford, and we both laughed as we went to class. But the real terror began after school, when the bell rang at 3 o'clock, I saw the police cars all over my street. As the bus pulled into the area, it slowed, taking an alternate route. My stomach twisted with dread as I got closer to my house. My worst fears were confirmed when I saw that Alan's bedroom window had been destroyed. Becky, the caretaker, sat in the back of an ambulance, her hands and face bandaged. My father was speaking to the police, but when he saw me, he broke down, sobbing and running to me. He hugged me tightly, the kind of hug I hadn't received since kindergarten. He pulled back, saying, "We're going to find your brother." Okay. I barely heard him. I shoved past him and into the house. No one seemed interested in what had just happened. I dumped the contents of my backpack on the floor and stuffed it with road flares, a flashlight, extra batteries, and a gun I had stolen from my father's safe. I stormed outside. My mind made up. I wasn't going to sit around waiting. I walked up to the nearest cop and said, "You damn well know that my brother's going to end up in a freaking preschool. Just grab some men and go down there already." The officer shot me an annoyed look and said, "Watch your language, kiddo." I glared at him, my anger bubbling over. "You're gonna do anything to save Alan, or what?" He turned back to his colleagues, and I stared down the road. I wasn't waiting around anymore. Dione caught up with me, and he stopped me in my tracks. "Damn it, Francis, stop." I paused and turned to him. He looked at me with concern. "What do you think you're gonna do to that thing?" I pulled the gun from my bag, racking the slide. I didn't need to say anything. The look on my face told him everything. The intensity of the situation had reached its peak. Dione and I were standing in the dim, abandoned preschool, the smell of raw sewage thick in the air. I could feel my heart racing as we made our way through the ruins of the building. Stephanie asked if I had another flare, and I passed her the flashlight and a few road flares. The atmosphere felt suffocating, and as we moved deeper into the darkness, the smell of decay and rot became overwhelming. We found a basement door, and as we stepped down the stairs, I led the way with the flashlight. The basement was a dark, eerie space, and we couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. The hole in the wall led into a tunnel, where Alan's leg was visible, a piece of rebar twisted around him. It was clear that the creature had been tormenting him, and he was barely conscious, not even aware of our presence. We tried to make a plan, but before we could act, the creature appeared. It was massive, covered in some slick, slimy substance. In the dim light from the flare, I could see its eyes locked onto mine, a predatory gleam in them. Dione threw another road flare, illuminating the creature's grotesque form. I pulled my gun and emptied the magazine into its torso, but the bullets didn't seem to faze it. The deafening sound of gunfire left us disoriented and unable to communicate. The creature retaliated, grabbing Stephanie by the face with one of its massive hands. I was still trying to reload when it used her body as a weapon, slamming me into the ground. Dione was quick, pushing the flare into the creature's arm, but it only flinched for a moment before punching him with the force of a sledgehammer, killing him instantly. In that moment, with my body broken and Dione's lifeless form beside me, I had almost given up hope. The creature laughed, a voice booming from deep within its chest, distorted like a recording of James Earl Jones playing through gravel. "There's no such thing as heroes," it taunted, its voice echoing through the tunnel. It moved deeper into the shadows, taking Stephanie with it, laughing all the while. I could barely move. My body was too mangled to respond. The road flare burned out, and the last of the light from our flashlight dimmed until I was left alone in the cold, suffocating darkness. Alan's whimpering stopped, and I realized my little brother was silent. The darkness consumed everything, and I eventually lost consciousness. When I woke up, I was in a hospital, my body wrapped in a full body cast. The search had gone on for a day before the police found me and Alan. Stephanie and Dione's bodies were never found, and a few days later, Dione was buried. I couldn't even attend his funeral. In the months that followed, the city filled the tunnel with concrete, hoping to contain whatever evil had been lurking beneath the streets. But as I grew older, I couldn't shake the feeling that the creature hadn't disappeared, it had just found a new place to haunt. Kids still went missing in that town every decade or so, and I couldn't help but wonder if the creature was still out there, waiting. Now, as I approach my 40s and have my own kids, I often think about what happened. It might seem strange, but I've encouraged my children to do bad things every now and then. I know it doesn't make me the best parent, but I'd rather they break a rule than end up on the wrong side of whatever hunts the good kids. Because as strange as it sounds, it only eats the good kids, but it has no problem with killing the bad ones. And to this day, I still don't understand why it spared me.